Good morning, preppers. How are you today? Welcome to our next edition of Goshen Prepping. Time is short, as we like to say, and we're going to see in this video specifically why time could be short. Now, instead of actually me teaching specifically what happens, I want you to be a witness to history. Because if we want to understand what's going to happen in the future, if we want to understand what possibly could happen in the future of the United States, we have to understand history, because the history teaches us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right into the video here. Let me switch over there. There we go. And we're going to talk about Venezuela. Now, when we talked about hyperinflation and stuff, we've talked about Nazi Germany, Venezuela before. There's many other places, but I found a couple articles. When we see what's happening in the United States, it brought me right to these articles to make me say, I wonder if this is what's going on here too. All right, so let's bear with me. It says, the first article, what caused the collapse in Venezuela in the Bolivar and how are they fixing it? So the Bolivar is simply their money, it's their dollar. And you can see right here that all throughout history, practically speaking, it's been very steady. Early 80s jumped up, and then of course it spirals out of control into hyperinflation. And that's actually the scary part about it. Look at this. It reached a peak rate, what was that, 344,000%. So think of it this way. If you can buy a loaf of bread for $1, that loaf of bread now cost $344,000 and some change. And that's according to their central bank. All right, in 83, look at this. Venezuela was one of the fastest growing economies and was the fastest in Latin America and one of the richest countries in the world due to large oil reserves that were discovered in World War I. They were so heavily reliant on it. So they didn't diversify. They really put everything into the oil because it made good money for them, that it completely just dominated their economic performance. In the 80s, it declined when oil prices plummeted. Venezuela had announced a devaluation of the Bolivar in 83, and off they go. And at this point, to make matters far worse, they had problems in politics. They had problems with the elections. And it's beyond the scope of this video to try to decide and decipher who really was at fault, who wasn't at fault. I think for those of you who research this, you already kind of know what's going on anyway. But to put it mildly, there became serious distrust and riots and civil unrest and all these things happening because of their election in Venezuela. And it simply spiraled the country out of control. Okay, let's jump back to it again. All right, I don't think there's anything else in this article. So what do you need to know? And this is actually what it came down to. BBC put this article out in 2019, and it says all you need to know about the crisis in 9 charts. And the first picture should actually kind of like frighten you a little bit, because remember, we're talking about, just think of this as their dollar. At one point, we're looking at 500 Bolivar for an onion, 250 for an egg. Was that 70? It looks like a hot dog bun, I guess, a loaf of bread, or a piece of bread anyway, and 200 for a tomato. And obviously the whole thing we're talking about, again, hyperinflation, power cuts, food and medicine shortages, political crisis. And that is what led me to today's discussion. Because when we look at the headlines of everything happening right now, California is on the verge of having major blackouts because people can't run their air conditioning and lights and everything else. And it's really tough sleeping sometimes in hot weather like that without air conditioning. So they're actually on the verge of blackouts. We're talking about power shortages all over the country. We're talking about inflation, record inflation kicking in. We're talking about the recession that we're in, medical problems, not being able to afford medicine. And a lot of this came about because a few days ago, my Subaru Outback, which I love my car, the muffler fell off on it as we got off the highway. And like it wasn't on the highway, but it's like, oh, I lost my muffler. And so I went straight over to a muffler repair shop. And after waiting in a long line, it reminds me of Soviet era Russia, by the way. After a long line, I get up front and it's like 11 in the morning. And this is a city that's a 40-minute drive for us. It's not down the street by any means. And the guy goes, all right, you'll have to come back at 2:30. I was like, oh, great. You can get me 2:30 work on it? And he goes, no. At 2:30, I can look at it and give you an estimate how much it'll cost. I was like, it's right there. And I pointed out the parking lot. You couldn't just tell me real quick because I don't live here. He goes, no, see you at 2:30. And I said, no, you won't see me at 2:30. And I went to another muffler shop just down the road, and it was a typical muffler shop that always was open. But now they are, apparently the guy who owns it works another job somewhere else and only comes in and does muffler work from like 6 until 9 p.m., taking on a second job, which we're finding some people to make ends meet are taking on second jobs or third jobs. And this is seeing all of this is what made me start this whole video, for the fact that we're already seeing a crisis at hand, waiting in line for stuff, shortages at the grocery store, and all this political unrest, all these things happening where we're no longer living in the land of luxury. And I'm not saying that's not necessarily a bad thing either, because when you get into luxury, you get fat, and you get complacent, and suddenly you have spoiled kids, and everybody wants what they want, and nobody wants to work for anything. And we're heading for a situation where we're seeing a complete turnaround in the economics of the United States. And again, where are we heading? Well, history will teach us. And that's why I got onto this basically subset of looking at Venezuela. All right, so let's jump back to the article. These are the things we're seeing here right now in the United States. All right, so it talks about the political upheaval, what happened there. First off, they talk about inflation is ridiculous. And again, people even on this channel who went through this tell us exactly what it was like. It was unreal. And again, you can see the inflation just taking off. And there's the two presidents that were quote unquote elected. Again, not getting into that. But you can see the inflation is just out of control because you can't even afford simply just a piece of bread. Let's see. It actually went 1.3 million% in 12 months. All right. So how many bolivars do you need for $1? Again, we saw a chart for that too. Okay, now this is where it starts to get interesting, and we might start seeing a correlation. The GDP is falling. Of course, we look at the GDP when it comes to inflation, recession, not inflation, but recession or a growing economy. And look, it's really not super bad. They actually had a couple months, a couple quarters anyway, or maybe it could be annually. Let's see. Yeah, it's annually going down. And of course, then it skyrockets. And you will see this in countries sometimes. You know what? Mediocre growth, and then it goes back a couple months or a couple years for whatever reasons. Then it shoots up and it does pretty well. And here we are now coming down, and we see this. And this, in my opinion, is very reminiscent of what was going on in the United States right now. Now, granted, this is 2 years, 2 quarters in the United States of recession. So if you want to take half this bar, here we are. Okay. That's basically where I stand. Are we going to continue and see it this direction? Is it going to recover? It's very difficult to say. And with all the things happening right now, if I'm a betting man, I would say it's going to continue at least this direction for the next 2.5 years. Again, I think probably a depression for 10 years, but I think at the very least, these 2 bars down is very realistic of what's going to be coming with us. Again, just historically speaking. All right. What else do we see in this situation? People don't have enough food. This is crazy. 8 out of 10 people said they were eating less. They didn't have enough food. 6 out of 10 said they went to bed hungry. That is 8 because they didn't have enough money. That's a difficult situation right there. Going to bed hungry, because when you eat food, it puts you in a nervous system condition called parasympathetic nervous system, where basically it shifts you into you eat and you go to sleep and digest, and you're all happy because you're taking a nice nap. If you're ever in a situation where you're trying to go to sleep and you went to sleep hungry, you have a very difficult time getting to sleep because there's no food in your stomach to try to make you sleepy. Not to mention, let's add on to this. If it's like one night, oh my gosh, I forgot to go grocery shopping. My kitchen's empty. I don't have time to go out and get anything. I'll go to bed hungry. That's one thing. But you go to bed hungry, and then you have kids who are probably going to bed hungry, and the economy of the country is collapsing, and food is scarce, and all these problems. It's not just the food keeping you awake, or the lack of food, I should say, but the stress of not knowing what's coming. And that in itself can make you go bonkers. All right, so this is actually comparing 2014 to 2017, so before and after. If you look, that a lot of people ate a lot of cornmeal, a lot of pasta and bread. Where's meat in this situation? They don't show any meat. It's just vegetables and stuff. Of course, everything went down, less than 80% now. But root vegetables, which honestly, if you're talking about trying to survive, root vegetables are awesome, like potatoes, for example. They really became heavily dependent on potatoes. But either way, you're looking at overall less food. And then you go into, let's see, 9 out of 10 people said they couldn't afford their daily food. 8.2 million had only 2 meals a day or fewer. Lots of malnutrition, lots of problems associated with it, and poor Venezuelan people. They don't have enough medicine. Now, in the United States, we are probably, I don't want to say the richest country when it comes to medicine. We are kind of the richest country as far as our technology is fantastic, but it's also fantastically expensive. And we actually have, in my opinion, corrupt medical overseers that don't allow certain procedures to happen, or whatever the case may be. So medicine in the United States is definitely a kind of like a tricky way to look at it. But anyways, they didn't have enough there. Basically, bad things happening. Look, rising cases of malaria. Because of this, it just skyrocketed too. More diseases. Think of it that way. Oil outputs on the decline. Now, this is actually what's going to probably sever Venezuela from possible futuristic America. Because when we talk about oil, that was their main income, was oil. And when the oil prices fell, so did the country. In the United States, oil is not our major problem, even though gas prices are really high right now, even though they shouldn't be this high. But we've seen in the news, if you haven't seen it, that Russia has basically said, nope, turned off the tap to Europe. And we've talked about if this happens, it's a worst case scenario because the Europeans, there's a lot of countries that simply won't have enough fuel to make it through winter. We're not talking about luxury. We're talking about survival. And there is I think it was in Sweden. They said that there's a think tank there or something like that. I forgot who said it, that they're going to be having riots because of this. Because the government, if they don't keep things in check and allow fuel oil to keep your people warm and have enough food for them, you have riots. And that's where they're heading. Now, surprisingly, oil prices are dropping a little bit. And they're actually looking at here in the United States, oil prices and gas prices actually starting to go down again. But they're still, don't get deceived and say, oh, cool, wow, now it's only $3.50 a gallon. It's still $3.50 a gallon, which is absolutely ludicrous. Okay, but anyways, they saw a decline in oil. And they were the oil manufacturers. Here in the United States, we may see, and probably will be, and have been seeing a decline in oil products like gasoline and diesel. And that's actually a result because of all this too. But you can see how for them it dropped down drastically. So let's see. Less food, more inflation, less medicine, and now less oil. Who buys Venezuela oil? Okay. All right. Many Venezuelans are leaving. And of course, because of this, a lot of them are going to different countries. In fact, there's some, again, who have contacted on our channel who have come here to the United States. And that's wonderful. I'm glad in this situation because honestly, I would not want to be anywhere near Venezuela. The country is gorgeous. The people are amazing. But what's happening there politically is atrocious. And I understand that they're going to want to leave because of this. So are we going to start seeing a mass exodus from the United States if this happens? Perhaps. I've actually had people message me, send me emails secretly and say, have you thought about what's it called, denaturalizing? I forgot the term. But where you basically say, I'm not going to be a U.S. citizen anymore. They've asked me that if I've considered that, which isn't something I would want to discuss on this channel. I don't want to go there. But obviously they are considering it. And that's something that I know many of you probably have thought about also is it time to skedaddle and get out? And then countries are split over who to support. So because of this, I mean, especially as we're heading into a worldwide depression, it's not going to be the United States into depression or Russia or China. It's going to be a worldwide depression. If this happens with us, who's going to come to our aid? The answer to that question is nobody. And that's the scary part of the whole thing, because at this point, if we head into this era, we're not going to see somebody coming to bail us out. In fact, just the opposite. It leaves us vulnerable for all kinds of infiltration via economically, via militarily, politically, for sure. And that's actually some of the scary things. As I really stress the word, if this happens in the United States. If you want my opinion, I believe it will happen. I do. But you know what? My opinion is worth nothing. You know, I simply just have a channel and I talk basically in history, and that's what we look at. We look at the history and we be prepared, because Goshen prepping is all about preparing so you don't live in fear, because this is fearful. This is scary stuff. So all we can do is prepare, prepare, prepare. And of course, we outline all throughout the rest of our videos on how to do that. All right, thanks for coming along. Thanks for joining us. And I hope you gleaned something from this. And I would love to see your opinions in the comments below. Thanks for watching.